Hello, ladies and gents! Like many of you probably, I have been super busy during the holidays, causing a disturbing lack of gaming time, but I could still sneak in a couple of Ace Tanker games nonetheless. From one of these, today's subject is the Tier 7 Chinese medium, the T-34-1, a machine that's not overly popular exactly, which actually goes for the whole line I guess, but one that can be actually still quite effective. Now, as usual, we will start off with a very quick look at the history of the machine and the armor profile of it. So, if you wanna skip straight ahead to the action, your timestamp awaits in the description below. Now, history-wise, we will be rather quick indeed, as this is one of those blueprint-only machines. The story is that back in 1954, the Chinese government was thinking about building their own variant of the trusty, but by then a little bit outdated T-34-85. Now, the T-34-1 was actually a suggested alternative, which would have made the machine a little bit lighter and smaller. No prototype was ever built, however, so the tank didn't even see trials. Now, jumping over to the in-game armor profile, luckily we actually have something to talk about. The Chinese medium tanks are usually quite resilient, at least compared to their same tier counterparts, and the T-34-1 is no exception. Now, the hull itself isn't that impressive with only 60mm of armor on the upper plate, 45 on the lower plate and the sides, and a bare 40mm in the back. But this is actually good enough so the tank can side-scrape effectively with careful angling, and thanks to the low silhouette of the machine, the lower plate is actually often an auto-bounce zone for the enemy as well. Now, the turret on the other hand is quite impressive for a tier 7 medium, with 170mm of well-rounded armor in the front, 120 in the sides and 60 in the back. The nice round design will cause quite a few bounces on the side of the turret, and the gun mantlet, while rather small, will block pretty much anything as well. High penetration guns can go through the cheeks of the turret next to the gun, but you will still need about 200mm plus to go through there. The only real weak spot are the cupolas with 30 to 120mm of armor only, but if you can put this thing hull down and keep moving back and forth, you can be a surprisingly tough nut to crack to the enemy. Alright, this was probably enough with the dry stuff, so let's fire up those engines and have a look at those stats during the gameplay. Alright, so here we are in our T-34-1, this time around in a standard battle on Swamp. Now, before we start to have a look at the details of this little machine, let's just have a very quick look at the match we got ourselves into, and, well, it isn't really the stuff of dreams, is it? We are bottom tier, we will be mostly facing tier 8s, and there are even a couple of tier 9s on the enemy team to make matters even worse. So we really have to play this one smart if we want to have a good result. But back to the Tier 7 Chinese medium, what's this tank actually like? Well, I certainly had a similar vibe than with the T-20, the Tier 7 American medium, although the tanks will have some pretty important differences. Why I'm saying is that they are kinda similar is because both of them play like more of a support tank, which are reasonably mobile, have a quite nice punchy gun, but at the same time a low rate of fire, so they can't really go all in and just fight their way out of trouble. Get them into a good position though, and they can be quite effective, as we will also see in this battle. So let's first have a look at the gun. Now, the main difference between the T-20 and the T-34-1 is that while the T-20 has a 90mm gun, this one has a 100mm main armament. Although I have to say that the positives that it gains are rather minor only, and we will lose a lot in terms of gun handling. What's definitely on the positive side is now we have better penetration, 175mm, it's not bad at all at tier 7. And we are even more punchy with 250 average damage, which is not bad for a tier 7 medium tank. Our rate of fire is virtually the same as the T-20, only like 0.1 rounds a minute better, so the overall DPM, while definitely better than the T-20, it's not a huge difference with 1682 DPM. It certainly has to be said though as well that we carry a lot less ammunition than we did with the T-20 this time around, only 34 shells, so you better make sure that every single shot counts. I didn't really find that it would be a huge problem, but in longer drawn out games it certainly could give you a couple of issues. So far you don't really feel the huge benefits of having a 100mm gun compared to the 90mm, and here comes the issue. You didn't gain much, but you do lose a lot, and that's with the gun handling. Well, first of all, you have a lot worse aim time. Almost 2.8 seconds is a long time for a medium tank. And even if you fully aim, your accuracy is quite rubbish at 0.4 meters, so that's a bit of a drawback right there. Now dispersion values are rather mediocre as well, and you have the typical Chinese 5 degrees of gun depression. Now this tank is rather low profile, so it's not awful, but you will definitely feel the difference between this and driving something with 10 degrees of gun depression. So the gun is really what pretty much breaks this machine for me. I mean, it can perform nicely, but it's just not the same feel, it's not as responsive. The gun feels a little bit clunky at times, so it will not perform as reliably as you would be used to with, for example, the gun on the T-20. Now, of course, we can talk also about positive differences, one being the armor on this thing. As we did see at the beginning of the video, we gain actually quite a bit of armor, especially on the turret. Opposite to the T-20, which really can't bounce much, this thing, especially if you can get hull down and don't stay still in one place, you can be actually quite a nasty thing to dig out from a strong position. Regarding the mobility, it's kinda similar, but with a few differences. Your top speed is a little bit less at 50 km per hour, which is still kinda alright. Your power to weight ratio is slightly worse as well, at 16 horsepower per ton, which is still alright, especially as we have the same terrain resistances as the T-20. We can get up to a decent speed and get into good position, but it's definitely not light tank-like mobility. So, overall we can say that the T-34-1 is a quite nice support tank, but there are just stronger alternatives out there, starting with the T-20, if you want to have this big punchy support experience. Still, if you can get into a good position, and usually the ass of the T-95 is to be considered a good position, you can have a lot of fun with this thing. It's just quick enough so it can get itself into position and then really start to work its way through the enemy armor. So yeah, we are over 3000 damage already in a basically tier 9 match. As you can see, if you have a team that you can actually support, you can still do a reasonable amount of damage even without having to touch your APCR shells. So, verdict time. It's not a bad machine, but it definitely won't be my favorite choice at tier 7. Alright, this was then my first days in the T-34-1, and while I didn't have to carry my socks off really, I was very happy with the overall result nonetheless. Ace tanker, high caliber and Confederate, not bad from a tier 7 tank in a tier 9 match. Now of course for this we had to do a little bit of shooting as well, and with close to 4000 damage and 1460 base experience, I think we did our part. By the way, second in place by experience was actually the Tier 7 Chinese light tank, a WZ-131. Chinese tanks for the win. Last but not least, we fired 21 shots, only 16 of which hit, but at least all of them penetrated as well. And since we didn't have to fire any APCR shells in this game, we closed the match with a rather nifty 53,000 credit profit. So, that's it from me about the T-34-1. I hope you found this little video useful or at least entertaining, and if you did, thanks a lot for considering giving this a like or sharing it. Now tomorrow we are back with another episode of the Arty Party series, and over the weekend we will have some rather special games, including a 1 vs 6 run in the Lux and a 1900 base experience game in the very popular T-26-E5 Patriot. Thank you very much for watching everyone, and I look forward to seeing you again in one of the next videos.